The Wilsford Shaft. Sounds like some kind of Victorian steam engine component, but no, it's a hole in the ground near Stonehenge, and probably just as old. Let's look into that, shall we?
Yes, let's look into that. It's astonishing that something so potentially significant in the Salisbury Plain landscape should be so little known. But the Wilsford Shaft, it was basically discovered in the 1960s, very early 1960s actually. The excavations
1960
were done in,
itself, I think.
Found in 1960, excavated in 61, 62, I think.
Correct.
And it was by Paul Ashby and Edwina Proudfoot and others. We'll get to that later. And basically, they were investigating a pond barrow. And if you don't know, a pond barrow is essentially, it's a saucer-shaped depression in the ground with usually a small bank around it. And so they were excavating this because it's associated with Bronze Age burials, the burial mounds. And, it turned out that there was really a very significant shaft going straight down underneath it. And what they dragged out of that, what they excavated out of that, is really quite surprising and extensive. And it was clearly in use for a long time.
Yeah. Well, the shaft's just southwest of Stonehenge.
Is it southwest? Yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's sort of along the A303. If you're travelling along the A303 past Stonehenge, then it would be on your left, heading west down there. So it's a collection of other barrows there. Hence the assumption about the pond barrow. I may say a few words about pond barrows, maybe later on. But I think the fascinating thing is you've got a jumble of stuff that they found down there. I think the first bit of excavation they did, they only went down, what was it, 40 feet or so, 60 feet, I can't remember it. But, it was only in the second year that they got down to where it narrows down to, it's a depth of 100 feet, which is extraordinary.
Yes, 30 metres. Now, it is a very deep shaft.
The big question is whether it's anything to do with Stonehenge at all. It's less than a mile from Stonehenge. Is it? And it's in the Stonehenge landscape. Is it anything to do with Stonehenge? And that's where the dates become interesting of the stuff they found there. Can we nail down the sort of stuff they found in the shaft?
Items themselves. Yes. Do you want to go downwards or do you want to come upwards? Because I'm most impressed by what they found right at the bottom.
Well, no, well, of course, but we must leave that to the end or to later on.
They found various pieces of pottery. Didn't they? Flakes and blades.
The pottery was, they dated mostly to mid Bronze Age, kind of 1500 BC or thereabouts. But they're sort of, there's nothing really significant. The bone needles.
There's a shale ring, wasn't there?
That's right. That was a bit further down. But here's the thing, we're not talking about stratification here because further down does not mean older in this case because it's just a question of where stuff is lodged and, of course, the rate at which it was probably silting up through time. So which is an interesting point because it seems that the mid-Bronze Age stuff was found nearer the middle. I can't remember. Ah, yes, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what makes this so confusing, if you like, is that when they actually got to the bottom, that the dating of the things that they found at the bottom, particularly evidence of antler picks being used to dig it, it's just going straight down into the salt rock. So at the bottom, you've got dates of between 3,650 and 3,100 BC. So let's just nitty-gritty, don't we? Yeah. So let's say 5,500 years old, and so if the bottom of the shaft is reliably dated to that period, well, I say reliably dated. I think it's reliably dated. There's a little bit of contention, and I don't really know why there is, to be honest. Do you know why there's any contention? Well, yes,
because there is the slight possibility that the single datable element to the early Neolithic or mid-Neolithic could have fallen in later. It could have been dislodged from the earth round the side, and come in there. That's true, but I'm just saying.
Yes, but that to me is why it is incontrovertible, because if it had slipped in from the sides at that depth, well, it means that somebody's dug down that deep in the Neolithic. It's not going to have fallen in from higher up.
Yeah, that's what it could have done. That is the possibility that is mooted by those that would dispute the date.
Yes,
or not allow the date as absolute.
Yes,
that's a problem. I agree with you. I agree with you that on balance, it is most likely that we're looking at a 3,500 BCE well. But it's only on one bit of evidence.
Well, I'll tell you what clinches it for me. It's that
go for it.
It's that the well goes down to the water table.
Yeah,
and
as wells do.
As wells do, exactly. It goes down to the water. And what were the two items that they found at the bottom that are dated to the Neolithic? It was the remains of a wooden container. Let's call it a bucket. And rope, one of the very rare examples of Neolithic rope that have been found. And so at the bottom of a shaft, you've got a bucket and rope down at the water table, and they're saying that's not evidence that the bucket and the rope were down there in the Neolithic. It's silly.
Well, yeah. Well, they, I don't know who they are, but
I don't know who's disputing it or saying that it's.
I don't know if everybody is. To be honest, I think it may be just a conversation going on in our heads.
Well, no, there was something. There's this stuff thought to be, and it could be, and possibly, and I don't see what else you could. I don't see how you can argue with that. If there's a bucket and rope at the bottom of a well. That's dated to the Neolithic. I don't know why you'd say, no, it's Bronze Age. They dug it deeper in the Bronze Age and put a 2,000-year-old bucket down there.
Yeah.
It's...
yeah, but I get it, because the vast majority of the stuff down there is Middle Bronze Age. And you've just got the one Neolithic. It's up, you pays your money and you takes your choice on that one.
But anyway, that aside, I think other interesting aspects are that they excavated it because it was associated with these Bronze Age barrows. So they were just looking to see what the Bell Barrow was about. Pond Barrow, I beg your pardon. Yes, Bell Barrows are something quite different.
They are a thing. You didn't just make that up, folks.
They are. Yep. I didn't make that up. No, they are a thing. In fact, going completely the other way around.
Yes.
But no, that's why they excavated it. And it is interesting that pond barrows do seem to be associated with barrow cemeteries. So yeah, you can see why there's all sorts of confusion around it. But that has also made people wonder whether, well, do all the pond barrows in cemeteries have wells going down underneath the associated pond barrows? Well, it's possible.
That was the speculation that came in straight after this discovery. It was Edwina Proudfoot herself that made the discovery. So I think during the Riverside project they did do a bit of investigation with that in mind, but nothing came up as definitive. No. So really don't know if pond barrows can be reliable indicators of sunken shafts in the way that the Wilsford Shaft presents itself.
Do you know? I
think, reiterate, of course, that if you've got a barrow cemeteries, then we are those Barrow cemeteries belong in the Bronze Age. So that's the other bit, slightly.
Well, I find that aspect quite evocative, really, though, because if we just humour me on this, if we just on the basis of the dating and the depth of the shaft, if we say, no, okay, that is a Neolithic well, then it's not altogether crazy that people would decide to 1,000 years later that they would decide to put their cemetery, their Barrow cemetery, in the vicinity of the well. And it's
a fair speculation, but it will always have to remain one. I'm afraid. I mean, the interesting thing is, if this is a Neolithic well, the dating puts it 100 years or so before it's estimated. The first bit of Stonehenge went up, the bank and ditch, the early bit of Stonehenge, the cemetery Stonehenge. So that's quite interesting. Mind you, it's not that close to Stonehenge. It's, I suppose, close enough.
No, it's not.
A mile, isn't
it? But if we accept the fact that it must have been a large settlement anyway, it would already have been a large settlement at that point. Well, people do need water, don't they? And it's not that close to the Avon, the river. So, do you know, one of the things that absolutely amazes me is you think of the engineering skill to dig 100-foot deep shaft without it collapsing. They cut it with antler picks without it collapsing.
Going through chalk, though, so they're okay for that.
Yeah, chalk is solid,
and it's 1.4 meters wide. Which is a fair width.
Yeah,
it gives you a space to swing an antler pick. Obviously,
I'm actually surprised that there weren't more human and animal remains down it, to be honest. I mean, there were some, but not many.
The human, disarticulated human remains mostly were found near the top, so in fact were dated to the Iron Age. Yeah. And Iron Age remains are actually quite rare in the Stonehenge landscape, but that, I'm afraid, is another story, perhaps.
It is. But it also illustrates the fact that we have no idea what the structure may have been at the top.
Sure.
And
There's
we
nothing
also
to indicate.
We also don't know, when was the bank put up, for example? Are we saying that it was a Neolithic bank? No, it could have been a Bronze Age bank. I'm not sure what the dating is in the bank itself. So we don't know how the well might have changed its form over that period. But was there a really a traditional, say traditional, you know what I mean, a structure at the top with
Don't know. Rupert.
We have no idea. We have no idea.
Again.
But the reason I'm speculating is that the lack of animal, or the small number of animal and human remains down it at that depth, makes me think that there must have been some structure at the top that made it harder for things to stray close to it.
Maybe. You're absolutely right. Because for something of such antiquity, there is very few items that had been discovered. I think they were hoping, the hope was that they'd have found all kinds of votive offerings at the bottom, because this is one thing in the whole Stonehenge landscape that would have been untouched. I mean, just to broaden it out a bit, one thing I hadn't realised is that, this is an end result of fascination after the war years, where this land had been taken back, because of the emphasis on increasing the food production. A lot of land around Stonehenge had gone back to arable farming. So that's why the Barrows were being levelled down. And so this was part of an effort to make sure, because the area was still being farmed, in the 50s, early 60s. So there was a push to get in those Barrows and get what information they could out before everything went under the plough, only to find that Stukely and Cunnington had been there. Been there before. So the Wilsford Shaft, there were high hopes of stuff being down there, but there wasn't. This is the fascinating thing. Should we get on to, it's a mystery. We should call this the Wilsford Shaft mystery, actually, because it leaves interpretation open. The paper associated with this excavation by Edwina Proudfoot, Paul Ashby and Martin Bell is interesting because there's only one conclusion at the end of the paper. In this, there are two conclusions, aren't there? One by Martin Bell, one by Paul Ashby. Yes. How would you describe them?
Well, how would I describe it? I think it's fair to say that Martin Bell is an environmental archaeologist.
Yes.
Now, Paul Ashby, and in fairness, because I have been quite cruel about it in the past, but
see the video up there first.
Yeah, but in fairness, the well is associated. We're calling it a well. The shaft is associated with a Barrows cemetery. All right, now Martin Bell, his interpretation is that this is a shaft to the underworld. This is a way of descending down into the underworld, into the land of the or the world of the departed.
The liminal world.
The liminal world. Good word. Yes.
Yes.
Whereas Martin Bell said, "Well, it's a 100-foot deep shaft that goes down to the water table."
With a bucket and a
rope at the bottom. It's a well. But even in the face of that logic, Martin Bell still believed it to be a shaft.
Paul Ashby did. Yeah.
Sorry, Paul Ashby. What did I just say? Paul Ashby still thought that it was a shaft to the underworld. Where'd you go with that? It's a long shaft to the water table with rope and a bucket. It's a well.
Which happens to be in the underworld.
Yes. Now, obviously, we can say this, and there's lots of archaeologists, I'm sure, who would say yes, but you can't say that because you don't know for certain. I just think you have to take certain things on the balance of probability. That's my take on it, anyway.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we should bring it to an end. What would be your conclusion, folks, as to the purpose of the Wilsford Shaft, just off the A303, not far from Stonehenge itself? A fascinating thing. Not many people know about it, but you don't. You know as much as anybody right now. Thanks for listening or watching, whichever way you've consumed this piece of nonsense, and look forward to seeing you again very, very soon indeed. Bye.
Take care,
for now
folks.
from me.
Bye.
Cheers.